Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we step gently back through time and arrive in one of the most extraordinary cities the world has ever known. You find yourself standing on the deck of a creaking wooden ship as it glides slowly toward a glittering shoreline. Before you rises Istanbul in the 17th century, a city of domes, minarets and crowded wooden houses climbing the hills like a layered tapestry. The morning air smells of salt tar, roasted sesame bread and faint smoke drifting from hundreds of chimneys. Seagulls circle overhead, arguing loudly with one another, as if they personally own the harbour. Beneath your feet the ship groans. Softly ropes tighten sailors shout in a dozen languages, and the water of the Golden Horn ripples in slow green waves against the hull. You are arriving in the capital of the Ottoman Empire, one of the largest and most powerful cities on earth in the 1600s. At this moment, the empire stretches across parts of Europe, North Africa and the Middle East. Goods, ideas and people from 3 continents flow toward this harbour, like streams feeding a great river. You lean against the railing and watch the shoreline grow clearer. Hundreds of boats crowd the water. Fishing vessels, merchant ships, tiny rowboats, darting like insects between them. Some carry spices from India. Others transport grain from the Black Sea or silks from Persia. The harbour is a floating puzzle of wood and canvas. A widely accepted historical observation tells us that 17th century Istanbul may have held somewhere between 500,000 and 700,000 residents. That makes it one of the largest cities on the planet at the time, rivaling places like Paris and Beijing. Standing here on the deck, you begin to understand how such a population could exist. The city stretches far beyond what your eyes can easily grasp. The skyline rises in layers. Tall mosque domes shimmer softly in the sunlight. Thin minarets point toward the pale blue sky like elegant needles. Between them stand endless rows of houses made mostly of timber, their upper floors leaning slightly over narrow streets. If you listen carefully, you can already hear the city speaking. Dockworkers shouting, wood creaking, distant hammering. Somewhere far inland, the first call to prayer drifts across the rooftops, floating like a long musical ribbon through the morning air. The sailors begin lowering the gangplank. A sailor beside you wipes sweat from his forehead and mutters something in Greek. Another man laughs in Arabic. A boy carrying coiled rope hums quietly in Turkish. Istanbul has always been a meeting place of languages. Scholars still debate the exact number of languages spoken daily in the city during this period, but travellers often wrote about hearing half a dozen dialects just while walking a single street. Venetian merchants bargain loudly in Italian. Jewish traders speak Ladino. Armenian craftsmen shout across workshops. Persian diplomats whisper over cups of sherbet. You step down the wooden plank, carefully boots touching the dock of Galata. The boards beneath you feel warm already, though the morning is still young. And immediately the city presses in. Porters hurry past, carrying enormous sacks on their backs. One man balances a tower of wooden crates that seems physically impossible. Another drags a small cart that squeals in protest with every turn of the wheel. A donkey wanders by with the calm confidence of someone who knows traffic laws do not apply to him. You take a breath. The smell here is powerful and complicated. Saltwater fish, sweat leather, citrus peels, damp rope spices. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it is certainly alive. You probably will not survive this day with perfectly clean shoes, but that is part of the experience. Ahead of you, the district of Galata rises uphill in a cluster of narrow streets and stone buildings. This neighbourhood is famous for its merchants and foreign traders. Europeans sometimes call them Franks, a broader term. that includes Italians, French, and others who come here chasing profit. Ships unload constantly along the docks. Barrels of olive oil roll down wooden ramps. Bales of wool are stacked in careful towers. Crates stamped with unfamiliar symbols are hauled toward warehouses that smell strongly of pepper and cinnamon. One small historical curiosity appears here on the docks if you look carefully. Some porters carry goods using thick leather pads strapped across their foreheads and backs. The technique allows them to move astonishing amounts of weight. Travellers from Europe often describe watching these men transport loads that would normally require 2 or 3 people elsewhere. It's not glamorous work, but it keeps the city alive. You step aside as a group of sailors push past laughing loudly. One of them holds a clay jug and drinks from it with heroic enthusiasm. The liquid inside is probably watered wine or perhaps boza, a fermented grain drink popular in the empire. Just ahead stands a small food stall already doing brisk business. A baker pulls round sesame bread rings from a basket. The smell is irresistible. These breads are called simit. They are simple, crunchy, slightly nutty, and perfect for hungry dock workers who have been awake since before sunrise. You buy one. Well, technically, you exchange a few coins and hope you understood the price correctly. The baker smiles anyway, which is a good sign. You bite into the bread. The crust cracks pleasantly between your teeth. Warm steam escapes, carrying the scent of toasted sesame. For a moment, you simply stand there chewing slowly, watching the harbour swirl around you like a living machine. A curious and slightly amusing tidbit appears when reading travellers' diaries from this era. Several visitors complained that Istanbul's stray dogs seemed to have more confidence than the humans walking the streets. The dogs roamed freely, forming loose neighbourhood packs that guarded territory and occasionally escorted pedestrians like unofficial guides. One such dog trots past you now, tail wagging gently, completely unconcerned with the chaos of the port. He pauses, looks at you, and then decides you are not worth barking at. High praise, honestly. You glance upward toward the hills of the city. From here the skyline seems endless. Domes, towers, cypress trees, smoke drifting upward in soft ribbons. And somewhere beyond those rooftops lies the beating heart of the Ottoman world. Markets, mosques, palaces, bathhouses, coffeehouses where people will argue politics for hours while pretending they're just discussing poetry. But before you reach any of that, you must climb into the city itself. The road slopes upward from the harbour, winding between stone walls and busy warehouses. Merchants shout orders from balconies. A cart full of copper pots rattles past you like a musical instrument having a nervous breakdown. The sun rises higher. Light spreads slowly across the domes of distant mosques, turning pale stone into glowing gold. And as you begin walking uphill, the sounds of the harbour fade just slightly behind you, replaced by the deeper rhythm of the city. Footsteps, voices, hammering from distant workshops. The soft rustle of pigeons lifting into the sky. You are no longer just visiting a port. You are entering a living capital. And Istanbul in the 1600s is only beginning to reveal itself. The slope from the harbour pulls you gently upward, each step carrying you farther from the floating forest of masts behind you. The air shifts as you climb. Down at the docks, the scent of fish and tar dominates everything. Up here, the smells begin to change. Roasted nuts, damp stone, crushed herbs, and fresh bread drift through the streets in lazy waves. Your boots tap softly against worn cobblestones. The stones feel uneven underfoot, polished smooth by centuries of carts, hooves, and human footsteps. You quickly realise that walking here requires a little balance and a little patience. Ahead of you, the street widens into a crowded market space that feels like the beating heart of the harbour district. Stalls stretch along both sides of the road beneath wooden awnings. Canvas shades flap gently in the morning breeze. Traders call out prices while customers lean forward to inspect goods with careful curiosity. If the harbour is the city's mouth swallowing ships from distant seas, then this market is the stomach where everything gets sorted, traded and passed along. You step deeper into the market and the noise rises like a cheerful storm. A fishmonger lifts a silver-scaled catch toward the light, proudly displaying it to a group of sceptical buyers. A spice seller shakes open a cloth sack, releasing the sharp scent of pepper into the air. A fruit merchant arranges pyramids of figs so carefully that they look almost architectural. One commonly accepted historical observation tells us that Ottoman Istanbul served as one of the largest commercial crossroads in the Mediterranean world. Merchants from Venice, Persia, the Balkans, and North Africa regularly passed through its markets. The city functioned not only as a political capital, but also as an enormous trading engine connecting continents. You begin to see that truth in every direction you look. A man wearing a long robe trimmed with fur speaks quickly in what sounds like Italian, while counting coins into another merchant's hand. Nearby, two Armenian traders examine bolts of silk with intense concentration, rubbing the fabric between their fingers to test its quality. You pause at a spice stall that glows like a painter's palette. Mounds of saffron, cinnamon, turmeric, and crushed rose petals sit in shallow bowls. Their colours are so vivid they almost look unreal. Golden, yellow, deep red, earthy brown. The merchant notices your interest and scoops a pinch of ground cinnamon onto his palm, holding it out toward you. You lean forward and inhale. The smell is warm and sweet, instantly calming. It feels like a memory even if you have never been here before. Behind you, a porter rushes past with a load of ceramic jars tied together with rope. The jars clink gently like wind chimes as he moves. You step aside just in time. Porters seem to move through the market like determined rivers cutting through rock. Everyone instinctively shifts out of their path. Overhead, you hear the flapping of pigeons. The birds land on rooftops and ledges, watching the humans below with quiet patience. Occasionally one swoops down to steal a crumb from the ground before launching back into the air. You continue walking slowly, letting the rhythm of the market pull you forward. A baker's stall appears on your left. Long wooden trays hold fresh loaves stacked in careful rows. The crusts shine slightly from a light brushing of oil. Beside the bread sits another familiar shape, round sesame rings again. Simit seems to follow you everywhere. A small group of labourers stand nearby, eating breakfast together. One man dips his bread into a bowl of olives. Another drinks from a small copper cup while listening to his friend tell a story that seems to involve a goat and a very angry neighbour. You cannot understand every word, but the laughter is universal. A curious historical footnote from travellers of the time describes how street storytellers often performed in busy marketplaces like this one. They would gather small crowds by dramatically recounting epic tales, sometimes adding humorous exaggerations to keep the audience entertained. Some stories lasted hours, stretching long into the afternoon. You imagine one of those storytellers appearing, soon drawing listeners into a circle while the market hums around them. For now, though, the entertainment is simply watching people. A group of sailors bargain loudly over a stack of wool blankets. The seller insists on one price. The sailors insist on another. The negotiation becomes theatrical. Hands wave in the air. Voices rise dramatically. At one point, one sailor places his hand over his heart, as if personally wounded by the offer. Yet the mood remains friendly. In this market, bargaining is not just about money, It is a kind of social dance. You pass a stall selling copper cookware that gleams like small suns in the morning light. The merchant taps one pot with a wooden stick to demonstrate its clear ringing sound. The tone echoes briefly across the street. Nearby, a boy leads a small donkey carrying baskets of vegetables. The donkey moves with calm determination, ignoring the noise around it. You begin to notice something interesting about the layout of the market. Different goods seem to cluster together. Fish sellers near the lower end, bakers and grain merchants in another stretch, textile vendors further uphill. Researchers still debate how strictly these arrangements were enforced. Some believe the Ottoman authorities carefully organised market districts by trade to maintain order and quality control. Others suggest the clustering happened more naturally, as craftsmen prefer to work near others in the same profession. Either way, the effect is surprisingly organised for such a busy place. You turn a corner and suddenly the sound shifts again. The loud shouting of the waterfront fades slightly. Instead, you hear the steady tapping of hammers and the rhythmic scrape of tools. Workshops line this stretch of street. Inside one open doorway, a man shapes leather sandals while his apprentice pumps a small bellows beside a glowing charcoal fire. The smell of warm leather drifts out to greet you. Further along, a group of women examine embroidered cloth displayed on a wooden rack. They speak quietly among themselves, occasionally smiling as they compare patterns. Sunlight slides slowly down the street, bouncing off windows and copper trays. Dust floats through the air like tiny golden sparks. For a moment you pause and simply listen. Somewhere a distant drum beats once. Then again, the sound carries faintly through the streets before fading away. Perhaps soldiers marching somewhere deeper in the city, perhaps a ceremonial signal from a nearby barracks. Either way, it reminds you that this lively market exists under the watchful structure of an empire. Still, the people around you seem comfortable in their daily routines. Life here moves with confidence, as if the market has followed this same rhythm for generations. The road ahead begins rising again, curving gently between taller buildings. The stalls grow slightly fewer, the crowds thin just enough that you can walk without constantly stepping aside. Behind you, the harbour market continues buzzing like a living hive. Ahead of you, the city climbs higher into its neighbourhoods and hidden streets. And as you follow the slope upward, you start to sense that the real Istanbul, the one where ordinary people live their daily lives, is waiting just beyond the next corner. The street continues rising, pulling you gently away from the roar of the harbour markets. The crowds thin just enough that your shoulders no longer brush constantly against passing strangers. The air feels a little calmer here, though the city is still very much awake. You notice the change first in the sounds. The shouting merchants fade behind you. In their place come smaller, more intimate noises. A hammer tapping steadily inside a workshop. A woman calling to a child somewhere above. The quiet clatter of dishes being stacked near an open doorway. The street narrows, slightly bending between rows of wooden houses. Their upper floors lean outward over the lanes, supported by heavy beams that cast long shadows across the stones. Some houses have small carved balconies where laundry flutters in the breeze like colourful flags. You realise that these homes are built mostly from timber. The wood smells faintly sweet in the warm air. This construction style is one of the defining features of 17th century Istanbul. Most residential buildings are made of wood rather than stone. Timber is easier to work with and cheaper to repair after earthquakes, which occur often in this region. Yet it also makes the city vulnerable to fire, a danger everyone quietly understands. For now, the houses look peaceful. Their wooden walls painted in soft tones of ochre, faded red and pale blue. A cat sits on a windowsill, watching you pass with mild suspicion. Just ahead, a narrow side street opens like a small canyon between the buildings. You peek down it and see a cluster of children playing with a wooden hoop that rolls along the ground while they chase it, laughing loudly. Their game echoes against the walls, filling the quiet lane with energy. One boy stops when he notices you. He studies you for a moment with wide curiosity, then returns to the game as if strangers walking through the neighbourhood are simply part of the daily scenery. You continue walking. The road bends again, revealing a small open square surrounded by houses and workshops. A stone fountain stands at its centre. Water trickles steadily from a carved spout into a shallow basin. Several women gather around the fountain, filling clay jars. Their conversation flows easily while they work. One adjusts the scarf around her hair, while another carefully balances a full jar on her hip. Public fountains like this are common across the city. They serve as gathering points where neighbours meet, exchange news, and share small moments of community. Water infrastructure is taken seriously in the Ottoman capital. Aqueducts and underground channels supply fountains throughout the city. A widely acknowledged historical fact tells us that Ottoman rulers invested heavily in public water systems, continuing the ancient Roman tradition of aqueducts that once fed Constantinople. Some of those ancient structures still function during the 17th century, quietly delivering water from distant hills. You step closer to the fountain and listen to the gentle splash. The sound feels calming after the chaos of the harbour. A donkey approaches from the far side of the square, pulling a small cart loaded with firewood. The driver walks beside it, occasionally tapping the animal lightly to keep it moving. The donkey seems unimpressed by the entire situation. You notice another detail that travellers often remark upon. Stray animals roam freely throughout Istanbul. Dogs nap beside doorways. Cats wander rooftops and alleyways. They are tolerated by the population and sometimes even protected by local neighbourhoods. A curious anecdote appears in several European travel journals. Visitors wrote that Istanbul's cats were treated almost like minor citizens of the city, freely entering homes and shops in search of food and warmth. One such cat now crosses your path with slow dignity, tail raised high as if announcing an important diplomatic visit. You give the cat respectful space. Beyond the fountain, the square transitions into a row of small artisan workshops. Their doors stand open to the street, allowing light and air inside while craftsmen work. You pause at one doorway where a man sits cross-legged on a low platform, shaping clay on a spinning wheel. His hands move with quiet precision, turning a lump of wet clay into a graceful bowl. The wheel hums softly as it rotates. Behind him, shelves hold rows of finished pottery drying in the warm air. Some pieces are plain, while others carry delicate painted patterns. The smell of damp earth fills the small workshop. Further down the street, another craftsman shapes wooden spoons with a curved knife. Thin curls of wood fall into a pile beside his feet like pale ribbons. The rhythm of his carving forms a gentle pattern. Scrape, turn, scrape again. A passerby stops briefly to examine the spoons. After a moment they exchange coins, and the customer continues walking, slipping the new utensil into a cloth bag. Life here feels slower than the busy harbour district, yet the city still pulses quietly beneath the surface. You hear a distant call drifting through the streets. The melodic voice carries over rooftops and between houses. It is the call to prayer. 5 times each day, the muezzin calls the faithful to prayer from the city's many mosques. The sound travels surprisingly far, especially in the morning air when the streets are calmer. Some residents pause in their work when they hear it. Others continue with their tasks while acknowledging the moment in quieter ways. The voice echoes gently across the neighbourhood before fading into the distance. You resume walking. The road climbs once more, leading you past more homes, where daily life unfolds in small, visible details. A woman sweeps dust from her doorway with a short broom. Two men sit outside a shop discussing something with serious expressions while sharing a small plate of olives. Smoke curls from a chimney, carrying the smell of simmering lentils. You feel the texture of the neighbourhood around you now. This is not the glamorous face of Imperial Istanbul. It is the ordinary rhythm of families, craftsmen and neighbours. A curious detail from historical observers notes that many Ottoman neighbourhoods organised themselves around strong local ties. Residents often knew one another well and kept watch over the safety of their street together. Historians still argue whether this sense of neighbourhood responsibility was encouraged primarily by religious community structures or by practical necessity in a densely populated wooden city. Either way, the result is clear. People here pay attention to who comes and goes. You sense a few quiet glances as you walk by, though none feel unfriendly. The street ahead widens slightly again, and the rooftops begin to open toward a view of the distant skyline. Between two houses you catch a glimpse of a massive dome rising above the city. Its curved silhouette glows softly in the sunlight. A mosque somewhere deeper in the capital. The scale of it reminds you that beyond these quiet residential streets lies the grander architecture of empire. For now, though, you walk through the living fabric of the city itself. Children playing, craftsmen working, cats strolling like local officials, water trickling in a neighbourhood fountain. And step by step, Istanbul continues revealing its many layers. The street carries you gently upward until the rhythm of workshops and neighbourhood fountains begins to thin. Houses grow slightly larger here, their wooden walls carefully maintained, and their windows fitted with delicate lattice screens. A few small gardens appear behind low wooden fences where fig trees spread wide leaves into the sunlight. You slow your pace without even realising it. The city still hums around you, but the atmosphere has shifted into something quieter and more domestic. This part of Istanbul feels less like a corridor of trade and more like a place where people begin and end their days. Ahead of you, a wooden door stands open, revealing the inner courtyard of a merchant's home. From the street, you can see only part of the space, but it is enough to offer a glimpse of life unfolding within. A stone path crosses the courtyard toward the main house. Clay pots filled with herbs line the walls. A grapevine climbs lazily along a wooden trellis, casting patterned shadows on the ground. Inside the courtyard, a small group moves through their morning routine. A woman kneels beside a low table, arranging bread, cheese and olives on a wide tray. Nearby, an older man sits on a cushion reading quietly from a small book. Two children chase each other around the base of the grapevine, while trying very hard not to knock anything over. The smell drifting from the courtyard is warm and inviting. Fresh bred herbs and something gently simmering in a copper pot. You pause respectfully near the entrance, careful not to intrude too obviously. Daily life in Ottoman households often centres around these inner courtyards. The arrangement offers privacy from the busy streets while still allowing sunlight and fresh air into the home. Many houses are built inward like this, creating calm domestic worlds hidden behind simple wooden doors. Records from the 17th century suggest that merchant families in Istanbul could live quite comfortably if their trade prospered. Successful traders dealing in textiles, spices or metals often owned multi-room homes, employed servants, and maintained connections across several regions of the empire. The older man inside the courtyard glances up from his book. For a moment you worry you have lingered too long, but instead of frowning, he simply nods politely and returns to his reading. In a city as large as Istanbul, strangers passing through the neighbourhood are not entirely unusual. You continue walking slowly. Another courtyard door stands slightly open further down the street. From within comes the gentle splash of water as someone pours from a jug into a basin. The early morning routine across the city follows a steady pattern. Breakfast is simple but satisfying. Bread appears in nearly every meal, often accompanied by olives, cheese, yogurt and honey. Tea has not yet become the dominant drink. It will be centuries later, so many people enjoy sherbet made from fruit syrups or simply water from the neighbourhood fountain. A baker passes you carrying a basket of fresh loaves balanced expertly on his shoulder. The smell trails behind him like an invisible ribbon. You notice that the houses here often have projecting upper floors that extend slightly over the street. The design provides more interior space without widening the narrow lanes below. Wooden beams support the structure, forming shaded pockets where cats and dogs rest comfortably. One cat stretches lazily in such a patch of shade as you pass. Travel accounts from the period occasionally describe how animals became unofficial residents of the city. Cats especially were appreciated for their talent in keeping rats away from stored grain and food supplies. Some visitors even wrote that certain neighbourhoods fed the cats, regularly treating them almost like helpful neighbours. The cat opens one eye briefly as you walk by, then decides your presence is not important enough to interrupt its nap. Further along the street, you hear the soft rhythm of sweeping. A young woman clears dust from her doorway while humming a quiet melody. The sound blends with the distant murmur of voices drifting through open windows. Life here moves in calm layers. Yet even within this peaceful neighbourhood, the presence of the empire quietly shapes daily routines. From somewhere across the rooftops, you hear the distant beat of a military drum. The sound arrives faint but steady, echoing through the streets before fading again. The Ottoman capital always keeps one ear tuned to authority. Researchers examining household records from the era note that merchants often balanced family life with constant attention to trade networks. Letters might arrive from Aleppo, Cairo or Venice, carrying news about shipments and prices. A single merchant household could be connected to markets stretching thousands of miles. You imagine the older man in the courtyard reading not just a book, but perhaps a ledger or letter describing goods currently travelling across the empire. A small curiosity from Ottoman social customs appears just ahead. Two neighbours stand in the street exchanging greetings before beginning their day. They place their hands over their hearts briefly while speaking. The gesture expresses respect and warmth without requiring elaborate ceremony. Such small rituals fill the daily rhythm of the city. You continue along the gently curving lane until the houses begin to open toward a slightly larger street. Here, the movement of people increases again. A pair of apprentices hurry past, carrying rolled carpets between them. A woman walks carefully while balancing a clay jar of water on her head. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows as if determined to prove that morning has officially begun. The smells shift once more. Now you catch the aroma of roasting lamb mixed with onions and herbs. A cook tends a small street hearth, turning skewers slowly over glowing charcoal. The meat sizzles softly. Your stomach briefly reminds you that walking through Istanbul requires considerable energy. You pause to watch the cook for a moment. He sprinkles salt across the meat with careful precision before turning the skewer again. Meanwhile, a conversation drifts from two men seated on a wooden bench nearby. They speak quietly about news from the imperial court. Modern historians remain divided on how closely ordinary citizens followed the political life of the Sultan's palace. Some scholars believe most people paid little attention unless taxes or military campaigns directly affected them. Others suggest rumours and gossip about palace events circulated quickly through coffeehouses and marketplaces. Judging by the quiet intensity of this conversation, the people of the city clearly maintained some curiosity about the powerful figures who rule from the great palace beyond the hills. You begin walking again. The street slopes upward once more, revealing glimpses of the distant skyline between rooftops. Far above the houses, a great dome rises against the brightening sky. Its scale reminds you that the grand monuments of the imperial city are never far away. Yet the quiet courtyards and breakfast tables you just passed reveal something equally important. Istanbul is not only a capital of empire, it is also thousands of ordinary mornings unfolding behind wooden doors. And as you continue walking deeper into the city, another world waits ahead. A place where trade grows louder, crowds grow thicker, and the heartbeat of commerce echoes beneath vaulted roofs. The Grand Bazaar is not far now. The lane gradually widens as you continue climbing through the city. The quiet rhythm of courtyards and family kitchens fades behind you, replaced once again by the steady pulse of commerce. Foot traffic grows thicker, voices grow louder, carts rattle over the stones with determined urgency. Ahead of you rises a long stone wall, broken by a tall arched entrance. Above the arch hangs a wooden sign, darkened by years of smoke and weather. People move constantly through the gateway, disappearing inside like a steady stream flowing into a cave. You have arrived at the edge of one of the most famous marketplaces in the world, the Grand Bazaar. From the outside, the structure appears almost like a fortress. Thick stone walls form a massive rectangle covering several city blocks. Small domes rise along the roofline like a row of rounded helmets catching the sunlight. You step through the archway and immediately feel the air change. The bright sunlight softens as the vaulted ceiling closes above you. Light filters through small windows in the domes overhead, scattering pale beams across the stone floor. The temperature drops slightly, offering relief from the warmth of the street outside. And the sound. It is astonishing. Hundreds of voices echo through the corridors. Footsteps, bargaining, laughter, the clink of metal, the rustle of cloth. The bazaar hums like a living machine made entirely of human conversation. A well-documented historical observation notes that the Grand Bazaar had already grown into one of the largest covered markets on earth by the 17th century. The complex eventually held thousands of shops arranged along dozens of interconnected streets. For merchants and travellers alike, it functioned almost like a city within the city. You take a few steps forward and pause just to absorb the scene. The main corridor stretches ahead beneath a long stone vault. Shops line both sides, their entrances open wide so customers can see the goods displayed inside. Colour spills from every direction. Textiles hang like waterfalls of silk and wool. Carpets display intricate geometric patterns. Copper lamps glow warmly in the dim light. A merchant near the entrance calls out a greeting as you pass. His shop is stacked floor to ceiling with folded fabrics in deep blues, rich reds and bright gold threads. He lifts one piece of cloth and shakes it gently so the material ripples in the air. Even in the filtered light, the fabric shimmers beautifully. You continue deeper into the corridor. The bazaar is carefully organised in ways that become clearer as you walk. Certain sections specialise in particular goods. Jewellers cluster together along one passage. Leather workers fill another. Spice merchants gather in their own aromatic corner. The arrangement helps customers compare prices and quality between sellers who offer similar items. A row of metal workers sits just ahead. Their shops sparkle with trays, bowls and lanterns hammered from brass and copper. One craftsman taps gently on the surface of a large tray, shaping its pattern with a small chisel. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm echoes softly along the vaulted ceiling. You lean closer to examine the design. Tiny repeating flowers spread across the metal surface like a garden frozen in copper. The craftsman glances up briefly and smiles before returning to his work. Not every shop relies on shouting to attract attention. Some simply let the beauty of their craft do the talking. A curious detail recorded by travellers from Europe describes how bargaining inside the Grand Bazaar followed an almost theatrical ritual. Prices were rarely accepted immediately. Instead, buyers and sellers engaged in long negotiations filled with gestures, humour, and exaggerated expressions of disbelief. The performance could last several minutes or even longer. You witness one such negotiation just ahead. A merchant sits cross-legged on a raised platform surrounded by folded carpets. Across from him stands a customer holding one edge of a large rug while inspecting its weave. The merchant names a price. The customer gasps dramatically as if struck by sudden heartbreak. Hands rise into the air, voices grow louder, yet both men smile as they argue. After several rounds of friendly protest, the price gradually lowers. Finally, both men nod, coins change hands, and the carpet is rolled carefully for its new owner. The entire exchange feels less like a disagreement and more like a shared performance that both sides enjoy. You move on, drawn by the scent of spices drifting from a nearby corridor. Here, the air becomes warm and fragrant. Open sacks display cinnamon sticks, dried mint cloves, and bright orange peels. The colours glow under the dim filtered light. One merchant scoops a mixture of herbs into a small paper packet for a waiting customer. Another weighs saffron threads on a delicate scale. These spices have travelled astonishing distances to reach this market. Some arrive by caravan across Persia and Central Asia. Others journey by ship through the Red Sea and Mediterranean. Trade routes weave through the Ottoman Empire like arteries, carrying valuable cargo across continents. Yet even within this grand commercial network, small human details shape daily life. A boy runs through the corridor carrying a tray of tea glasses for several shopkeepers. The glasses clink gently together as he moves. Tea is not yet the national obsession it will become in later centuries, but warm drinks still circulate frequently through the bazaar. Sharing a drink helps build friendly relationships between merchants who may spend long hours sitting near one another. You accept a small glass, offered by a smiling shopkeeper as you pass. The tea is lightly sweetened and pleasantly warm. Nearby, two merchants discuss news from distant cities while sipping their drinks. Academic discussions continue over just how much information travelled through marketplaces like this one. Some historians believe merchants were among the best informed people in the empire because they constantly exchanged news about trade routes, politics and conflicts. Listening to the quiet conversation beside you, that idea feels entirely believable. The corridor ahead splits into several branching paths, each leading deeper into the maze of shops. Lamps hang from chains overhead, their light reflecting softly off polished metal surfaces. You pause for a moment in the intersection, footsteps echo in every direction. Voices rise and fall like waves. The Grand Bazaar feels endless, a labyrinth of commerce and craftsmanship that could easily occupy an entire day of wandering. Yet even here, surrounded by goods from across the world, you sense that the city still has more layers waiting beyond these stone walls. Markets, coffeehouses, mosques whose domes you glimpsed earlier from the rooftops, and somewhere not far away, the voices of storytellers and thinkers gathering around cups of a dark, new drink that has begun capturing the imagination of the city. Coffee. The thought alone seems to pull you gently toward the next street. You leave the deep corridors of the Grand Bazaar through a side passage that spills you back into daylight. The sudden brightness makes you blink for a moment. Outside, the air feels warmer again, and the sounds of the city return in a fuller, more open way. The streets around the bazaar buzz with steady activity. Porters carry wrapped bundles toward nearby warehouses. Apprentices hurry between shops holding tools or ledgers. A pair of elderly men sit on a bench under a plane tree, quietly discussing something with great seriousness. Yet among all this movement, a different kind of place begins appearing along the street. Low wooden buildings with open doorways, small signs hanging above the entrances. Inside each one, you can see people sitting together on benches or cushions arranged along the walls. From these rooms comes the sound of conversation and the smell. A dark, rich aroma drifts into the street. Slightly bitter, warm and deeply inviting. Coffee. You pause near one of the doorways and look inside. The interior is dim but welcoming. Sunlight enters through a few small windows, cutting narrow golden lines across the floor. A long wooden counter stands at the back where a man tends a small charcoal stove. Several copper pots rest over the heat, their narrow necks releasing thin curls of steam. Around the room, men sit in relaxed groups, speaking quietly, sometimes laughing, sometimes leaning forward in animated discussion. A generally recognised historical detail tells us that coffeehouses began spreading through the Ottoman Empire during the 16th century and became especially popular in Istanbul by the early 17th century. These establishments quickly evolved into important social spaces where people gathered to talk, exchange news, and enjoy a few moments away from work. You step inside. Your boots make a soft sound on the wooden floor as you find a seat along one of the benches. The room feels calm compared with the busy streets outside. Conversations overlap gently, forming a low hum that feels almost like the sound of rain on a roof. The man at the stove pours thick, dark liquid from one copper pot into several small cups. He brings one to you without asking many questions. The cup is tiny, barely larger than an egg, but the aroma rising from it is powerful. Roasted, earthy, and slightly sweet. You take a cautious sip. The flavour is intense, but strangely comforting. Around you the conversations continue. Two merchants discuss caravan routes through Anatolia. A young student recites lines of poetry to a friend while gesturing dramatically with his hands. In another corner, a man tells a story that has already caused several listeners to burst into quiet laughter. Coffeehouses become famous for this mixture of storytelling, debate, and casual entertainment. Some even host professional storytellers who perform epic tales from memory. Others feature musicians or players of strategic board games that can last for hours. One traveller from Europe once remarked with amazement that a man could enter an Ottoman coffeehouse in the morning and leave in the evening, having heard the entire history of several empires and at least 3 scandalous rumours about local officials. You watch as a server carries a tray of small cups through the room. The cups rattle softly together like tiny bells. People sip slowly. Nobody seems to be in a hurry. A small curiosity mentioned in several old accounts reveals that coffee houses were sometimes viewed with suspicion by authorities because people gathered there to discuss ideas, and news officials occasionally worried that political gossip might spread too freely. At various points in Ottoman history, certain rulers even attempted to restrict coffee houses. These efforts rarely lasted long because the drink had already become deeply loved by the population. You glance around the room again. It's easy to understand why people enjoy spending time here. The warmth of the stove, the steady rhythm of conversation, the slow sipping of coffee that seems designed to encourage patience rather than speed. At a nearby table, 2 men move small wooden pieces across a board marked with a grid of squares. The pieces slide quietly across the surface. The game appears serious. Both players lean forward with intense focus. A man watching beside them whispers advice that neither player seems interested in accepting. Meanwhile, the storyteller in the corner begins another tale. His voice rises slightly above the surrounding conversations as he describes a clever traveller outwitting a greedy official somewhere far away. The audience listens with smiles, occasionally murmuring approval when the hero of the story performs some clever trick. These performances help pass long afternoons. They also create a shared culture of stories that spread through the city. Researchers studying Ottoman social life often highlight the role of coffee houses as informal information centres. Merchants arriving from distant regions bring news about wars, harvests, and prices. Sailors describe conditions on the seas. Travellers recount unusual sights from lands far beyond the empire. The coffeehouse gathers these fragments of information and mixes them together with humour, speculation, and debate. Across the room, one man suddenly laughs loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Apparently, a particularly funny line has just appeared in the storyteller's tale. You finish the last sip of your coffee. The grounds settle at the bottom of the cup in a thick, dark layer. Some people enjoy examining the patterns left behind, claiming they reveal hints about the future. Whether this practice holds any truth remains uncertain, but it certainly adds a small layer of mystery to the end of every cup. Outside the window, the sunlight has shifted slightly, signalling that the day continues moving forward. You stand and step back into the street. The sounds of the city greet you once more. Hooves on stone, vendors calling out, the distant cry of gulls drifting in from the harbour. Yet the calm of the coffeehouse lingers in your thoughts. Istanbul reveals itself not only through its grand buildings and crowded markets, but also through these quiet rooms where people gather simply to talk. As you walk onward, the skyline opens again ahead of you. Great domes rise above the rooftops. Slender minarets stretch into the bright sky. Soon you will find yourself walking beneath those towering structures. The imperial mosques of the city are waiting, and within their courtyards another side of Istanbul's daily life quietly unfolds. You leave the warmth of the coffeehouse behind and continue along the gently rising street. The air feels brighter now, filled with the confident noise of a city fully awake. Sunlight spills across the rooftops and runs along the stone pavement like a quiet river of gold. As you walk, the skyline ahead grows clearer. Domes swell upward above the city blocks. Tall minarets rise beside them, slender and graceful, each one like a pale spear pointing calmly into the sky. The scale of these buildings becomes more impressive with every step. The closer you move toward the centre of the city, the more you begin to notice the sounds that define its rhythm. At first it is subtle, a low murmur of distant drums, a voice calling from somewhere high above the rooftops, the clatter of hooves striking stone. Istanbul does not measure time with quiet clocks. It measures time through sound. A well-known observation from city records explains that daily life in the Ottoman capital followed a schedule guided largely by the 5 daily calls to prayer. These calls, delivered by the muezzins from mosque towers, structured the flow of work, rest and devotion across the entire population. Even people who are not praying still recognize the moments. The first call had already passed earlier in the morning while you walked through the harbour markets. Now the next one approaches. You hear the voice begin from a nearby minaret. It starts softly, almost like the opening note of a song. Then it grows stronger, stretching across the air in a long melodic phrase that echoes between the buildings. Within seconds, other voices answer from distant towers. Another call rises from the west, another from the north. The city becomes a layered chorus of human voices carried by the wind. You pause for a moment just to listen. The effect is strangely calming. The overlapping calls drift across one another without rushing, filling the sky above the rooftops. Some people in the street pause briefly when they hear it. A shopkeeper closes his eyes for a second. A porter slows his steps before continuing up the road. Others simply keep walking, acknowledging the sound in quieter ways. The call fades slowly into the distance, and the city resumes its steady movement. You continue along the street, passing beneath a stone archway, where the echoes of footsteps bounce lightly off the walls. A small group of boys runs past you, chasing one another, their laughter trailing behind them like a ribbon. Just beyond the archway stands a row of instrument makers' shops. Inside one doorway, a craftsman tunes a long-necked lute. He plucks a string, carefully adjusts the peg, then plucks again. The note rings out bright and clear before fading into the hum of the street. Music is never far away in Istanbul. Travel writers who visited the city during this period often commented on the rich variety of sounds drifting through its neighbourhoods. Drums from military processions, flutes played during celebrations, and stringed instruments filling quiet rooms at night. In certain districts, musicians gather regularly to perform for audiences in small taverns or private homes. You hear another sound approaching from the far end of the street, a rhythmic drum beat. Boom, boom, boom. The beat grows louder as a small procession appears around the corner. At the front walks a drummer striking a large cylindrical drum strapped across his chest. Behind him follow several uniformed men carrying long staffs. These are janissaries. The janissaries form one of the elite military corps of the Ottoman Empire. Created centuries earlier as a professional standing army, they serve as both soldiers and a visible symbol of imperial authority. Administrative documents from the era frequently describe janissaries stationed throughout Istanbul, patrolling streets, guarding important buildings, and participating in ceremonial events. As they pass, the people along the street step slightly aside. The soldiers move calmly, not aggressively. Their uniforms appear neat and practical. Tall hats rise above their heads, making them easy to recognise even from a distance. The drum beat echoes along the street as they walk. Boom, boom, boom. Soon the sound fades again as the procession disappears around another corner. You notice the subtle change in the atmosphere after they pass. Not fear exactly, but awareness. A reminder that the empire is always present in the daily life of the city. You continue walking and the street gradually opens into a broader square. Pigeons flutter across the open space before settling again on the roof of a nearby building. Here the skyline becomes truly impressive. Before you stands a vast mosque complex. Its central dome rises high above the surrounding buildings, supported by smaller domes cascading outward like gentle waves frozen in stone. Slender minarets frame the structure on either side. The entire building glows softly under the afternoon sun. One observation repeated in many architectural studies is that Ottoman imperial mosques were designed not only as places of prayer, but also as centres of community life. Around the main prayer hall often stand schools' kitchens for feeding the poor, fountains and courtyards where people gather throughout the day. The mosque becomes a living hub within the city. You step closer toward the outer courtyard. The ground beneath your feet changes from rough street stones to smooth paving slabs. A gentle breeze moves through the open space, carrying the scent of cypress trees planted along the edges of the courtyard. Several people walk quietly across the square. Some head toward the mosque entrance. Others sit beneath the shade of trees, speaking softly. A small group of students sits near a teacher who reads aloud from a book while they listen attentively. One small curiosity recorded in travel accounts mentions that the courtyards of major mosques often functioned as informal meeting places where scholars, travellers and residents exchanged ideas. Conversations about philosophy, religion, poetry and politics sometimes unfolded here beneath the open sky. You notice two elderly men doing exactly that now. They sit side by side on a low stone bench, discussing something with animated hand gestures, while occasionally glancing toward the great dome above them. Meanwhile, a fountain stands at the centre of the courtyard, where several people wash their hands and faces before prayer. The water splashes gently into the basin, producing a calm, rhythmic sound that contrasts with the busy streets outside the complex. Modern historians continue to discuss how much these mosque complexes shape the social organisation of Ottoman cities. Some scholars believe they functioned almost like neighbourhood anchors that structured education, charity and community identity. Standing here in the quiet courtyard, the idea feels very convincing. You take a slow breath and look up at the vast dome rising above you. The stone surface catches the sunlight in soft curves. For a moment, the noise of the city feels distant. Yet beyond these peaceful walls, Istanbul continues moving, with its endless rhythm of voices, footsteps, trade and stories. And soon, you will step back into that rhythm once more. You step farther into the courtyard, leaving the bustle of the surrounding streets behind. The transition feels almost magical. Only moments ago, you were surrounded by merchants' carts and shouting vendors. Here, the atmosphere becomes softer, calmer, like entering a wide breath held gently in the middle of the city. Stone paving spreads across the courtyard in clean geometric patterns. Tall cypress trees rise along the edges, their dark green branches whispering quietly whenever a breeze passes through. The great mosque dominates everything around it. Its central dome rises like a calm sky of stone, supported by a cascade of smaller domes, stepping down toward the edges of the building. Slender minarets stand at the corners, elegant and precise, as if they were drawn with careful strokes of a pen. You tilt your head upward to take in the full height of the structure. The scale is difficult to grasp at first. Architectural studies of Ottoman Istanbul often point out that these imperial mosques were designed to impress, not only with size but also with harmony. Their domes, arches and courtyards follow carefully balanced proportions, meant to create a feeling of order and serenity. Standing here beneath the dome, you begin to understand the intention. Everything feels measured, balanced, calm. Several people move quietly across the courtyard, each following their own rhythm. A man approaches the central fountain and begins washing his hands, face and feet before prayer. Nearby, two elderly men walk slowly together while discussing something in gentle tones. The fountain itself sits beneath a small canopy supported by slender columns. Water flows steadily from several brass spouts into the basin below. The soft splashing creates a peaceful background sound that fills the open space. You step closer and watch the ritual of washing. The movements are careful and deliberate. Hands first, then the face, then the arms, finally the feet. These preparations, known as ablution, are part of the daily practice before prayer. Records from the Ottoman period show that mosques across the empire included fountains specifically designed for this purpose. Providing clean water for ritual washing was considered an essential feature of religious architecture. You dip your fingers briefly into the basin. The water feels cool and refreshing. Nearby, a young student sits cross-legged beside a pillar, reading quietly from a small book. His lips move silently as he traces the lines with one finger. Education often takes place in spaces like this. Many mosque complexes include small schools where children study reading, writing and religious texts. Teachers guide their students beneath shaded arcades or in nearby classrooms connected to the mosque. The courtyard becomes both a spiritual and intellectual centre. You notice a group of travellers entering through the far gate. Their clothing suggests they have come from distant regions of the empire. Dust clings to their boots and cloaks after long days on the road. They pause in the courtyard, clearly relieved to have reached the quiet shelter of the mosque. One of them stretches his back with visible gratitude. A lesser-known detail appears in several travel accounts, describing how major mosques sometimes served as resting places for travellers who had just arrived in the city. While not inns in the formal sense, their courtyards provided safe spaces to pause, wash, and gather strength before continuing onward. For many visitors, this courtyard might be their first calm moment after a long journey. You walk slowly along the edge of the square beneath a row of arches that form a shaded walkway. The stone columns feel cool when you brush your hand lightly against one. The sounds here are soft. Footsteps, water, distant voices drifting from the street outside the complex, and occasionally the flutter of pigeons landing on the roof tiles above. You glance upward just as a small flock lifts into the sky, circling the dome, before settling again along the minaret balcony. At the entrance of the prayer hall, several men remove their shoes before stepping inside. They place them neatly along wooden shelves built beside the doorway. You remain in the courtyard, for now, content simply to observe. Through the open doors you catch a glimpse of the interior. Carpets stretch across the floor in long rows. Tall windows allow light to pour into the space from multiple directions. The interior feels vast and quiet at the same time. One observation mentioned frequently by architectural historians is that Ottoman mosques use light in very deliberate ways. Windows placed at different heights allow sunlight to filter gently through the interior, creating an atmosphere that feels luminous but never harsh. The design encourages contemplation. Nearby, two men sit beside the wall, speaking quietly about matters of charity. Their conversation drifts toward you as they discuss food distributions organised by the mosque kitchen. Many large mosque complexes include public kitchens that prepare meals for the poor. These charitable services are funded through special endowments established by wealthy patrons or imperial officials. Documents preserved from the period show that thousands of meals could be distributed daily through these kitchens during certain times of the year. The mosque becomes not just a place of prayer, but also a centre for social support. You walk toward a low stone bench near the courtyard garden and sit for a moment. The breeze carries the faint scent of cypress and dust, warmed by the sun. Somewhere beyond the walls, a cart rattles across the street. But here, the calm remains. An interesting discussion continues among historians regarding how these large mosque complexes influenced neighbourhood life. Some researchers believe they functioned as anchors that shaped the surrounding districts, drawing markets, schools and housing into their orbit. Others suggest the relationship worked both ways, with busy urban neighbourhoods naturally growing around places where people gathered for worship and charity. Whichever explanation proves most accurate, the result is visible all around you. The mosque breathes with the life of the city. Students learning, travellers resting, neighbours meeting beneath the arches. You stand again and walk slowly towards the far gate of the courtyard. Beyond it, the streets begin to rise once more toward other neighbourhoods and other hidden corners of Istanbul. And as you step back into the sunlight, you realise the city still has many more layers waiting to be discovered. Among them, one place where warmth, steam and conversation fill the air in an entirely different way. The hammam. You leave the cool stillness of the mosque courtyard and return to the narrow streets beyond its gates. The city greets you again with its layered rhythm of footsteps, voices and distant trade. Sunlight slips between rooftops and paints warm patterns across the stone pavement. As you walk downhill along a gently curving lane, the smells of the city begin to change once again. Instead of roasted meat or spice stalls, the air carries something softer: warm stone, damp steam, a faint trace of soap and herbs. It's a smell both clean and slightly earthy. Ahead of you stands a low building with thick stone walls and several rounded domes rising from its roof like smooth bubbles. Small glass openings dot the domes, allowing shafts of sunlight to enter from above. You have arrived at a hammam. Public bathhouses form an essential part of life in Ottoman cities. Their design traces its roots back to Roman bathing traditions that once flourished in ancient Constantinople centuries earlier. Ottoman architects adapted these ideas and shaped them into bathhouses that combined cleanliness with social ritual. You step through the doorway and immediately feel the warmth. The entrance chamber feels comfortable and quiet. Wooden benches line the walls and shelves hold folded cloths and towels stacked neatly in piles. A few men sit talking softly while attendants move calmly through the room, carrying bundles of fresh linens. An attendant gestures politely toward a changing space where visitors remove their outer garments. Soon you are wrapped in a light cloth and guided toward the inner rooms. The temperature rises gradually as you pass from chamber to chamber. First a warm room, then a hotter one. The air thickens with steam and your skin begins to feel pleasantly warm. The central bathing chamber opens before you like a glowing cave of marble and mist. A large circular platform of heated stone fills the centre of the room. Around the walls sit marble basins fed by small brass taps where bathers fill bowls of warm water. The sound of water pouring echoes softly through the chamber. Splash, pour, splash again. Travellers visiting Istanbul often wrote about the hammam experience with great fascination. The bathhouse served not only as a place for cleaning, but also as a space for conversation, relaxation, and even business discussions. You step carefully onto the warm marble platform. The heat seeps slowly through the cloth beneath you, spreading through your muscles in a deeply relaxing way. Around you, several men recline quietly, allowing the warmth to loosen their bodies after long days of work. One man stretches his arms overhead with visible relief. Another leans back with his eyes closed, clearly enjoying the calm. Attendants move through the room carrying wooden bowls filled with water. When someone signals for help, an attendant pours warm water gently across their shoulders before scrubbing the skin with a rough mitt that removes dust and sweat collected during the day. The process feels both practical and oddly luxurious. One detail mentioned in several old descriptions reveals that bathhouse attendants often developed strong reputations for their skill. Some visitors even requested specific attendants known for particularly thorough scrubbing techniques. The attendant who approaches you now works with steady confidence. Warm water flows across your shoulders, followed by a careful scrubbing that leaves your skin tingling and fresh. The sensation is strangely refreshing after hours of walking through the busy streets. When the washing is finished, you return to the warm platform and rest again while the steam curls gently around the room. Conversation flows quietly between bathers. Some discuss the price of grain shipments arriving from the Black Sea. Others talk about recent events in the capital. Laughter occasionally ripples through the steam like a soft breeze. Bathhouses provide a setting where social boundaries relax slightly. Men from different professions sit side by side while enjoying the warmth and quiet. Urban historians studying Ottoman cities often point out that hammams functioned as important social spaces where information and gossip circulated freely. News about trade politics and neighbourhood affairs often passed through these rooms just as easily as through coffeehouses. A man nearby begins telling a story about a merchant who attempted to cheat a customer in the bazaar and was loudly exposed by a crowd of angry shoppers. The listeners laugh softly at the ending. Steam continues drifting upward toward the domed ceiling, where beams of sunlight filter through the small glass openings. The light creates glowing columns in the mist, turning the chamber into something almost dreamlike. You close your eyes for a moment and simply listen. Water, voices, the quiet breathing of people resting in the heat. An amusing note recorded in a few travellers' journals describes how some bathhouses employed musicians during special occasions or festivals. Gentle music would echo through the steam-filled chambers while guests relaxed on the heated stone. Whether that practice happened often remains uncertain, but the idea certainly fits the peaceful mood of the place. Eventually, the warmth begins to make you pleasantly drowsy. You move toward the cooler outer chamber where attendants offer towels and cups of cool water. Sitting on the wooden bench again feels surprisingly refreshing after the heat of the inner rooms. Your skin feels lighter. Your muscles feel loose. The bathhouse experience seems to wash away not only dust, but also the tension of the busy streets. Before leaving, you sit for a few moments watching others arrive and depart. Some men enter looking tired after long hours of labour. They emerge later with relaxed expressions and freshly combed hair. A discussion among historians continues regarding how frequently ordinary residents visited bathhouses during the 17th century. Some scholars suggest weekly visits were common in many neighbourhoods, while others believe frequency varied depending on occupation and income. Regardless of the exact schedule, it is clear that hammams played a central role in maintaining both cleanliness and community life. You step back outside into the afternoon sunlight. The air feels cooler against your freshly washed skin. The sounds of the city return gradually, like waves rising again after a moment of calm. Carts roll across the streets. Vendors call out from market stalls. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs loudly. You begin walking once more through the winding streets of Istanbul. Ahead lie neighbourhoods filled with many different communities, each adding their own traditions and languages to the life of the city. Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Turks, and countless travellers passing through. The next streets will reveal how all these lives weave together inside the vast tapestry of the Ottoman capital. You continue along the winding street, your skin still feeling fresh from the warmth of the bathhouse. The air of the city greets you again with its mixture of cooking fires, distant sea breeze, and the faint perfume of herbs drifting from open kitchens. The neighbourhood slowly changes as you walk. You begin noticing different architectural details on the houses. Some buildings feature small stone carvings above their doorways. Others display painted wooden shutters in bright colours that stand out against the sun-faded walls. Voices reach you in several languages at once. A man passing by greets his friend in Greek. Two women speaking Armenian pause beside a fruit stall. A shopkeeper calls to a customer in Turkish while weighing dried figs on a small brass scale. Istanbul feels less like a single city and more like a gathering place for many worlds. Contemporary travel diaries from the 17th century frequently remark on the remarkable diversity of the Ottoman capital. Merchants, craftsmen, scholars and sailors from numerous cultures lived side by side within its districts. Entire neighbourhoods sometimes developed around particular communities who maintained their own traditions, languages and places of worship. As you continue down the street, the atmosphere shifts into something lively and colourful. A small market square opens ahead of you. Stalls cluster beneath wooden awnings where merchants sell bread, vegetables and bundles of herbs tied neatly with string. The smell of fresh dill and mint fills the air. A group of women gathers near one stall, examining a basket of eggplants while discussing the price with animated gestures. The merchant listens patiently before lowering the price slightly, which brings satisfied nods all around. Nearby, a baker pulls flat rounds of bread from a clay oven built into the side of a small shop. The bread emerges puffed and golden, releasing a warm cloud of steam. You watch as several children wait eagerly for the next batch. The baker tears one piece and hands it to a small boy who immediately runs off to share it with his sister. The easy rhythm of everyday life unfolds all around you. Some distance away, a synagogue stands quietly between two houses, its doorway marked by subtle symbols carved into the wood. Not far beyond it rises the bell tower of a small Orthodox church. A few streets further stands another mosque with its own slender minaret. Different faiths exist within the same urban landscape, each community following its own traditions, while sharing the same streets and markets. Municipal records preserved from the Ottoman administration indicate that many communities were organised into what historians later called the millet system. Under this arrangement, religious groups managed certain aspects of their own legal and educational affairs, while still remaining under the authority of the Ottoman state. The system created a complex but functioning balance that allowed diverse populations to live within the same imperial capital. You pause beside a stall selling dried fruits. The merchant offers you a slice of apricot. It tastes sweet and slightly tangy, carrying the warmth of distant orchards. An interesting observation appears in several travel accounts, describing how residents of different backgrounds often adopted elements of one another's cuisine. Recipes travelled easily through neighbourhoods, passing from household to household, along with gossip and friendship. As a result, the city's food culture became richly blended. You continue walking. Two Jewish merchants stand outside a textile shop discussing a shipment of wool that recently arrived from the Balkans. Nearby, an Armenian goldsmith sits carefully engraving a ring under the light of a small window. The gold catches the sunlight and glows warmly. Across the street, a Greek fisherman unloads a basket of fresh catch from a small cart while speaking cheerfully with the stall owner who plans to cook the fish that evening. Each person adds another thread to the fabric of the city. A small curiosity recorded by visitors involves the many languages spoken within a single conversation. It was not uncommon for merchants to switch between Turkish, Greek, Armenian, and Italian, depending on who happened to be standing nearby. You hear an example of this just ahead. A trader negotiating with two customers shifts smoothly from Turkish to Greek before finishing the discussion with a few words in Italian. The customers seem completely comfortable with this arrangement. It is simply part of daily life here. The square grows busier as the afternoon continues. A donkey cart rattles through the market, carrying baskets of grapes. Several stray dogs trot behind it, hopefully perhaps expecting a dropped snack. A storyteller sits on an overturned crate near the fountain, describing a humorous tale involving a clumsy traveller who managed to fall into 3 different fountains during a single afternoon. The listeners laugh loudly at the final line. Stories seem to flow through the city as easily as water. Yet the complexity of this shared urban life has sparked long discussions among historians. Some researchers argue that relations between communities were generally peaceful and cooperative in daily practice. Others suggest tensions sometimes appeared beneath the surface, particularly during times of political or economic stress. The truth likely shifted from neighbourhood to neighbourhood and year to year. Standing in this lively square, however, the atmosphere feels cooperative rather than divided. People trade, children play, neighbours greet one another in passing. The city moves forward through countless small interactions that rarely appear in official histories. You leave the square and follow another narrow street that curves gently downhill. The shadows grow longer now as the afternoon light begins to soften. Ahead you notice several women walking together, carrying woven baskets filled with vegetables and cloth bundles. They speak quietly among themselves, occasionally pausing to examine goods displayed in shop windows. Watching them, you begin to realise that the lives of women in this city form their own intricate world. A world that moves both within the home and through the public spaces of markets, baths and streets. The next corner will reveal more of that story. And like every other layer of Istanbul, it will be richer and more complex than you might first expect. You follow the group of women down the gently curving street, careful not to hurry your steps. The afternoon light has begun to soften, giving the wooden houses and stone walls a warmer tone. Shadows stretch across the ground, and the city feels slightly calmer than it did earlier in the day. The women walk in easy conversation, their voices quiet but lively. Each carries a basket filled with small purchases from the nearby market. One basket holds fresh greens and herbs. Another contains folded cloth and a small clay jar sealed with wax. They pause beside a stall, where a merchant sells brightly coloured ribbons and embroidered handkerchiefs. The stall owner greets them warmly, clearly familiar with his customers. One of the women lifts a piece of cloth and examines the stitching with careful attention. The thread catches the sunlight in tiny sparks. Daily shopping forms one of the many ways women move through the public life of the city. Descriptions written by travellers who visited Istanbul during this period often remark that women appeared regularly in markets, bathhouses and neighbourhood streets. Although certain social customs encouraged modesty and privacy, the idea that women lived entirely hidden lives inside their homes does not match the reality described in many accounts. You watch as the women finish their purchase and continue down the lane. Further along the street, another scene unfolds. A young girl carries a small basket while walking beside an older woman who appears to be teaching her how to select vegetables from a stall. The girl inspects a tomato carefully before nodding with great seriousness. The merchant smiles at her concentration. Moments like this form the quiet education of daily life. You pass a house where a window stands open just wide enough to allow voices to drift outside. Inside, several women sit together around a low table, sewing pieces of cloth into what appears to be a quilt. Their hands move quickly while they talk. The soft rhythm of their work blends with the gentle murmur of conversation. Many households rely on skills like sewing, weaving, and embroidery to maintain clothing and household items. These crafts also allow women to contribute economically through the production of textiles and decorative goods. Court records preserved from the Ottoman period show that women could own property, manage businesses, and even appear before judges in legal matters related to inheritance or trade. These documents reveal a social structure more flexible than many outsiders once assumed. You pause briefly to watch a small group of girls skipping rope in a courtyard beside the house. Their laughter rises brightly above the quieter sounds of the street. One girl loses her rhythm and the rope tangles round her feet. The others collapse into giggles. Life in the neighbourhood carries on with easy familiarity. Just ahead, you notice the entrance to another hammam. This one serves women during certain hours of the day. Several women gather near the doorway, chatting while waiting for friends to arrive. The bathhouse plays a particularly important social role for women. Observers from earlier centuries sometimes describe these gatherings with fascination. They wrote about entire groups of friends or relatives visiting together, bringing food, sweets, and music, while spending hours talking, washing, and relaxing in the steam-filled chambers. For many women, the hammam offered a rare opportunity to socialise freely beyond the walls of the household. A small curiosity from old travel journals mentions that weddings were sometimes preceded by celebratory bathhouse gatherings where friends decorated the bride with henna and sang traditional songs. You imagine the steam-filled room glowing with candlelight and laughter during such occasions. The street continues downward, opening into another small square where a fountain stands surrounded by fig trees. Women gather there to fill clay jars with fresh water. One carefully lifts a jar onto her shoulder while adjusting her scarf against the breeze. You approach the fountain and listen to the steady trickle of water. The scene feels peaceful. Children play nearby, while several older women sit together on a bench discussing the events of the day. Their conversation drifts between practical matters and gentle gossip. The details of neighbourhood life often pass along these informal networks. Urban historians studying Ottoman cities frequently point out that women helped sustain strong community ties through daily interactions at fountains, markets and bathhouses, These spaces allowed news, advice, and support to circulate naturally through the neighbourhood. Without such connections, the city's enormous population might easily feel anonymous. Instead, small communities form within its winding streets. A donkey cart passes slowly through the square, its driver greeting the women politely as he guides the animal around the fountain. You notice the driver tipping his head respectfully as he passes. Courtesy appears in many small gestures here. The women eventually gather their jars and baskets and begin returning toward their homes. You continue along the street now, climbing gently uphill again. The houses grow quieter as the day begins leaning toward evening. Cooking fires ignite behind wooden doors. The smell of simmering lentils and roasted vegetables drifts through the air. Inside one courtyard, a mother calls her children to come inside before supper grows cold. An ongoing discussion among historians considers how much freedom women experienced in different parts of Ottoman society. Some scholars emphasize the legal rights recorded in court archives. Others focus on social expectations that shaped everyday behaviour within families and neighbourhoods. Both perspectives offer valuable insight into a complex reality. Walking through these streets, you sense how life moves within a balance of tradition, community, and personal relationships. The city is too large and varied for a single simple description. Ahead of you, the road widens again, and the distant sound of drums carries faintly through the evening air. The presence of soldiers reminds you that beyond these quiet domestic scenes stands the powerful machinery of the empire. Soon you will encounter that world more directly. The street widens as you continue walking, and the gentle quiet of the neighbourhood begins to give way to a more official atmosphere. The buildings grow larger and sturdier. Some are built with heavier stone foundations, and several display carved symbols above their doors that hint at administrative or military use. You hear the sound before you see its source, a steady rhythm of boots striking the pavement, not hurried footsteps like those of merchants or children running errands. These steps move with measured precision. A group of soldiers appears at the end of the street. Their uniforms are neat and distinctive. Each man wears a tall white headpiece and a long coat that moves slightly as they walk. At their sides hang curved blades, though none of the soldiers rest their hands upon them. They walk calmly, but their presence immediately draws attention. These are janissaries. Accounts preserved from Ottoman administrative records describe the janissaries as one of the empire's most disciplined military forces. Established centuries earlier, the corps served directly under the authority of the Sultan and played a major role both on distant battlefields and within the capital itself. You step aside along with several other pedestrians as the soldiers pass. The sound of their boots echoes down the street in steady rhythm. A drummer follows at the rear of the group, striking a large drum slung across his shoulder. The low tone rolls through the air with each beat. Boom, boom, boom. The sound is not threatening. Instead, it carries the feeling of order, as if the city itself is briefly marching in step. A shopkeeper pauses in his doorway to watch them pass. A pair of apprentices stand respectfully against the wall until the soldiers move beyond the corner. Once the procession disappears, the street slowly returns to its normal pace. Vendors resume calling out their goods. A cart creaks past carrying sacks of grain. Children return to their games. Yet the moment leaves a quiet reminder. The empire's authority always exists just beneath the surface of everyday life. You continue walking along the street until you reach a small square where several soldiers stand speaking with one another beside a stone building. Their posture is relaxed now that the march has ended. One of them removes his hat and wipes his brow while laughing at something his companion has said. Moments like this reveal that soldiers share the same human routines as everyone else in the city. A small stall nearby sells roasted chickpeas. One of the janissaries steps over and buys a handful, tossing a few into his mouth while continuing his conversation. Visitors who described Istanbul in earlier centuries often noted the visible presence of soldiers in the streets. The capital required a strong military presence to guard important buildings, maintain order and respond quickly if unrest appeared. At the same time, soldiers often lived within the city's neighbourhoods, interacting regularly with ordinary residents. You sit for a moment on the edge of a stone fountain while observing the scene. A young boy approaches the soldiers carrying a tray of small cups filled with sweetened water. The men thank him and take the cups, dropping a few coins into the boy's hand. He runs off happily toward another group waiting nearby. Small exchanges like this connect even the powerful institutions of the empire to the everyday life of the streets. Further along the square stands a modest barracks building with narrow windows and a heavy wooden door. Several racks of spears lean neatly against the outer wall. Inside you can hear voices and the occasional burst of laughter. Life inside the barracks likely follows its own routines of training, discipline, and long hours of waiting. Historical studies of the Janissary Corps often describe them as a unique military institution. Originally recruited through a system that brought young boys from various regions into imperial service, the soldiers were trained carefully and raised within a culture of loyalty to the Sultan. Over time, the organisation evolved and gained considerable influence within the political life of the empire. You stand and continue walking through the square. A baker nearby pulls trays of bread from his oven, the warm smell filling the air once again. Two soldiers purchase several loaves and carry them back toward the barracks. Even soldiers must eat supper. A curious anecdote appears in several older accounts describing how Janissaries sometimes expressed dissatisfaction with their leaders through unusual signals involving their cooking pots. When unhappy with certain decisions, they might overturn these pots in a symbolic act of protest. The image seems almost humorous now, though it carried serious meaning within the culture of the cause. You pass beneath another stone archway leading toward a busier district. The sky above has begun shifting into softer colours as the afternoon slowly approaches evening. Light reflects off the windows of nearby houses, creating warm golden glimmers along the street. The city continues its steady rhythm. Merchants pack away goods for the day. Children are called home for supper. Soldiers finish their patrols. Researchers studying the political structure of the Ottoman capital often discuss how the balance between civilian life and military authority shaped daily routines in the city. Some scholars suggest that the visible presence of the Janissaries helped maintain stability across such a large and diverse population. Others point out that the corps itself sometimes became deeply involved in political struggles within the empire. For the ordinary residents walking these streets, however, the soldiers are simply another part of the city's landscape. You glance back once more toward the square where the Janissaries stand, talking beside their barracks. The drumbeat from earlier has faded completely. Now only the quiet sounds of evening preparation remain. Ahead of you, the street slopes gently toward another cluster of homes and cooking fires. The smell of supper drifts through the air, inviting and warm. Soon the kitchens of Istanbul will begin filling the evening with rich aromas, and you will discover how the city gathers around its tables at the end of the day. You leave the square where the soldiers were standing and follow the street as it slopes gently downward between rows of wooden houses. The day has begun shifting toward evening now. The sunlight grows warmer, stretching across the rooftops in long amber ribbons. The sounds of the city soften slightly as people begin returning to their homes. Yet a new set of aromas rises into the air. Food. It begins subtly, a faint scent of onions warming in a pan. Then the deeper fragrance of herbs crushed into simmering broth, As you walk farther, the smells grow richer and more complex. Istanbul is preparing dinner. You pass a small stall where a cook stands beside a charcoal grill, turning skewers of meat slowly above glowing coals. The meat sizzles with every rotation, releasing bursts of savoury smoke that drift into the street. Several workers gather around the stall, clearly finishing their long day of labour. The cook slices pieces of lamb from the skewer and wraps them inside flatbread, along with onions and fresh herbs. The customers accept the parcels eagerly and move aside to eat. Urban food traditions in Ottoman Istanbul developed from many cultural influences across the empire. Kitchen records and recipe manuscripts from the period reveal a diet rich in grains, vegetables, dairy, and meat prepared with fragrant spices. These meals often balance simplicity with careful flavour. You continue down the street and notice that nearly every doorway now carries the gentle glow of firelight. Inside one open courtyard, a family gathers around a low table. A pot of lentil stew sits at the centre, while bowls of yogurt and bread surround it. The family members dip pieces of bread into the stew while talking quietly. The scene feels peaceful and familiar. Across the lane, another home releases the smell of roasted eggplant mixed with garlic and olive oil. A young boy fans the cooking fire with a small woven mat while his mother stirs the dish carefully. Food preparation fills the early evening hours throughout the city. Many homes rely on shared neighbourhood ovens where families bring their dishes to cook. These communal ovens allow several households to prepare meals without maintaining large fires in every home. Documents from Ottoman kitchens describe a wide range of dishes that appeared regularly on city tables. Lentil soups, rice, pilaf, stewed vegetables, grilled meats and fresh bread form the backbone of daily meals. Sweet pastries flavoured with honey or fruit often appeared during special occasions. You pass a narrow alley where a vendor sells bowls of warm chickpea stew to travellers and labourers who do not have kitchens of their own. He ladles the stew into clay bowls while greeting customers with cheerful energy. A few wooden stools sit nearby for anyone who wishes to eat immediately. The stew smells earthy and comforting. A small curiosity recorded in several travellers' journals mentions how common street food stalls were throughout Istanbul. Vendors sold roasted chestnuts, stuffed breads, soups and sweets to busy workers who needed quick meals during the day. These stalls created a lively outdoor dining culture long before modern restaurants existed. You continue walking as the sky above begins slowly shifting toward the softer colours of sunset. Pigeons flutter across the rooftops, searching for places to settle for the night. Somewhere nearby, a cook begins grinding spices with a heavy stone mortar. The rhythmic thump echoes faintly through the street. A group of sailors passes by, laughing loudly while carrying a basket filled with fresh bread and dried fish. They seem eager to return to their ship before darkness falls. The city continues feeding itself. You approach another open square where a larger food stall has gathered a small crowd. A copper pot, nearly as wide as a wagon wheel, rests over a large fire. Inside the pot, rice simmers slowly with pieces of lamb, carrots, and fragrant spices. The cook lifts the lid and stirs the mixture with a long wooden paddle. Steam rises in a fragrant cloud. Several customers wait patiently with bowls in their hands. Accounts written by visitors to Istanbul often describe the impressive scale of cooking in both private homes and public kitchens. Large households prepared meals for extended families and servants, while charitable kitchens attached to mosques sometimes distributed thousands of portions of soup or bread to those in need. Feeding the city required constant effort, yet it also created opportunities for generosity. You sit briefly on a stone bench near the square and watch as people collect their dinners. A young apprentice carries 2 bowls of rice carefully across the street. A merchant purchases several portions to bring back to his shop workers. A group of children gather excitedly around a tray of honey pastries that have just arrived from a nearby bakery. Laughter rises as one child manages to sneak an extra pastry before the others notice. The moment feels warm and human. Some historians studying Ottoman food culture continue discussing how culinary traditions moved across the empire through trade routes and migration. Ingredients from distant regions often found their way into Istanbul kitchens, blending flavours from Anatolia, the Balkans and the Middle East into a single shared cuisine. Standing here in the square, that mixture feels easy to believe. The smells alone tell the story of many lands. The sky darkens slightly as the sun begins slipping behind the hills. Lanterns appear in several shop windows. A cook lights a small oil lamp beside his stall so he can continue serving customers after sunset. You rise from the bench and continue along the street once more. The evening atmosphere spreads through the city like a calm blanket. Voices soften, footsteps slow. Soon the streets will fill with lantern light and quiet conversation. Night in Istanbul carries its own rhythm, and you are about to discover how the great city settles into the darkness beside the waters of the Bosphorus. You continue along the softly lit street as evening settles more firmly across the city. Lanterns begin appearing in windows and doorways, their warm glow spreading across the cobblestones like small pools of amber light. The air feels cooler now, carrying a faint breeze from the water beyond the hills. The lively sounds of cooking and dinner conversations drift through the neighbourhood behind you. Ahead, however, a different kind of place draws your attention. A modest building stands beside the road, with a wooden sign carved with symbols of herbs and small glass jars. Through the open doorway you can see shelves lined with bottles, bundles of dried plants, and curious instruments made of brass and glass. You step closer and peer inside. The room smells strongly of crushed leaves, vinegar, and something slightly bitter. This is an apothecary. A man in a long robe stands behind a wooden table, carefully grinding herbs with a stone mortar. His movements are slow and deliberate as he prepares a mixture that releases a sharp scent into the room. Medicine in the 17th century relies heavily on herbal knowledge and traditional practices passed down through generations. Records preserved from Ottoman medical schools show that physicians studied a mixture of classical Greek texts, Arabic medical writings, and their own observations of plants and treatments. The result was a complex system that blended scholarship with practical experience. You step inside quietly. The apothecary glances up briefly and nods politely before returning to his work. Around the room, jars contain ingredients gathered from many regions. Dried mint leaves, powdered roots, bundles of lavender, and small crystals of salt sit carefully labelled on wooden shelves. The variety suggests that healing in this city draws upon knowledge that travelled long distances. A woman stands near the counter holding a small pouch while describing her symptoms in quiet detail. The apothecary listens carefully, occasionally nodding as he selects ingredients from several jars. He measures the powders on a delicate scale before wrapping them in folded paper. Nearby, a young apprentice writes notes in a small ledger, carefully recording each preparation. The process feels both scientific and mysterious. You notice several strange objects resting on a nearby shelf. One appears to be a glass tube attached to a small metal frame. Another resembles a set of curved blades stored in a wooden case. Medical tools of the period vary widely depending on the practitioner. Physicians trained in major cities often combined herbal remedies with techniques such as bloodletting, cupping, and careful observation of a patient's pulse and breathing. A widely circulated belief among doctors of the era held that health depended on maintaining balance among the body's internal humours. Treatments aimed to restore that balance when illness appeared. You watch as the apothecary finishes preparing the woman's medicine and hands it to her with instructions on how it should be taken. She thanks him and leaves the shop quietly. A small curiosity appears in several old descriptions of Ottoman medicine. Some healers believed certain illnesses could be treated with perfumes or aromatic smoke made from burning herbs. Patients would inhale the scented vapour in hopes of clearing the body of harmful influences. The practice may seem unusual now, but scent and smoke carried powerful symbolic meaning in many cultures. You continue examining the shelves. Glass jars filled with colourful liquids catch the lamplight. Some glow deep red, while others appear pale yellow or cloudy green. Each bottle contains a carefully measured remedy waiting for its next patient. Outside the shop, a donkey cart rolls slowly down the street while the driver hums to himself. Life continues moving even as illness and healing unfold quietly behind these walls. You step back into the street and continue walking. A short distance away, another building catches your eye. This one is larger with a courtyard visible through its open gate. Inside, several men wearing long robes move between rooms carrying trays of instruments and cloth. This appears to be a small medical lodge where more serious treatments take place. Medical institutions existed throughout Ottoman cities, often connected to charitable foundations established by wealthy patrons. These facilities provided care for those who could not afford private physicians. Historical studies of Ottoman healthcare note that hospitals in major cities sometimes included specialised wards, pharmacies, and even gardens where medicinal plants were grown for treatment. You pause near the gate and watch as an attendant helps an elderly man step carefully into the courtyard. Another worker carries a basin of water toward a room where patients are resting. The atmosphere feels calm and attentive. Inside one window, you glimpse a physician examining a patient's wrist while counting the rhythm of the pulse. Observation plays an important role in diagnosis. Doctors listen carefully to breathing, examine the colour of skin, and ask detailed questions about diet and daily habits. An interesting discussion among modern historians centres on how advanced Ottoman medical practice was compared with contemporary systems in Europe and Asia. Some scholars emphasise the strong intellectual tradition inherited from earlier Islamic medical scholars. Others note that many treatments remained rooted in ancient theories that would eventually be replaced by newer scientific understanding. Both perspectives reveal how medicine evolves gradually across centuries. The lamplight in the courtyard grows brighter as evening deepens. You continue walking once more. The street now grows quieter as families finish their dinners and shopkeepers close their doors for the night. The smell of cooking fades into the cooler air. Lanterns flicker gently along the road, while distant footsteps echo across the stones. Soon the city will settle into its nighttime rhythm. Watchmen will begin their patrols. Dark alleys will fill with quiet shadows. And the great capital of the Ottoman Empire will reveal how it protects itself while most of its citizens sleep. You continue walking through the softly dimming streets as evening settles across the city. The last warm colours of sunset fade behind the rooftops, leaving the sky a deep shade of violet above the domes and minarets. Lanterns now glow in nearly every window. The city does not fall silent, but its rhythm changes. The busy clatter of markets disappears, replaced by quieter sounds. Conversations drift from doorways. A distant lute plays somewhere beyond the next street. Footsteps echo more clearly across the stones now that the daytime crowds have gone. As you turn into a wider avenue, the calm atmosphere shifts again. Ahead of you, bright lights flicker in clusters, and the sound of drums carries through the evening air. A celebration is beginning. You follow the sound and soon arrive at a broad open square where people gather beneath rows of hanging lanterns. The lights sway gently in the breeze, casting moving patterns across the ground. At the centre of the square stands a small stage built from wooden planks. Several musicians sit cross-legged on the platform, holding instruments that shine faintly in the lamplight. A drum begins the rhythm. A flute answers with a long winding melody. The crowd slowly grows larger as more people arrive to watch. Festivals and public celebrations formed an important part of life in Ottoman cities. Imperial holidays, religious festivals and special events connected to the court often filled public squares with music, food and entertainment. Descriptions written by visitors during the 17th century frequently mention the colourful spectacle of these gatherings. You move closer to the edge of the crowd. Several dancers now step onto the platform. Their movements follow the rhythm of the drum with graceful precision. Their arms rise and fall while their feet strike the boards in quick patterns that echo across the square. The audience watches attentively. Some clap softly in time with the music. Others simply stand with quiet smiles. Food stalls line the edges of the square, offering sweet pastries soaked in honey, roasted nuts and warm bread filled with spiced meat. The smell mixes with the faint scent of oil lamps and night air. You purchase a small pastry and taste the sticky sweetness. Nearby, a storyteller gathers a group of listeners around him. He gestures dramatically while describing a clever hero who escapes danger through wit rather than strength. The listeners laugh when the villain receives his well-deserved humiliation. These performances provide entertainment, but also reinforce shared cultural stories that travel through the empire. An interesting detail appears in several old travel accounts, describing large imperial festivals organised by the Ottoman court. During particularly grand celebrations, the city sometimes hosted elaborate parades featuring decorated animals, musicians, acrobats, and theatrical displays that lasted for days. Such spectacles demonstrated both the wealth and the organisational power of the empire. Tonight's gathering feels smaller and more local, yet the joy remains genuine. Children run through the crowd, chasing one another between the lantern posts. A group of older men sit on a bench discussing the skill of the musicians with serious concentration. The flute player suddenly performs a long spiralling melody that causes the audience to applaud with enthusiasm. You notice that people from many different backgrounds share the same space comfortably. Merchants, craftsmen, sailors and families all stand together enjoying the evening. Public festivals often created moments when the normal boundaries between professions and neighbourhoods soften for a few hours. A vendor passes through the crowd carrying a tray of cups filled with sweet sherbet made from fruit syrup and water. The bright red drink glows under the lantern light. You accept one and take a sip. The flavour is refreshing after the warm pastry. Near the edge of the square, a group of acrobats prepares their performance. One young performer climbs onto the shoulders of another before balancing carefully while the drumbeat grows faster. The crowd cheers when the pair completes the stunt without falling. These displays of skill add excitement to the celebration. Scholars examining the social life of Ottoman cities often note that festivals served several purposes at once. They entertained the population, reinforced shared traditions, and sometimes carried subtle political meaning by demonstrating loyalty to the Sultan or the faith. In many cases, the celebrations blended religious devotion with pure enjoyment. You watch as the dancers return for another performance. The lanterns sway gently above them, and the drum beat echoes across the square. For a moment, the city feels united by the rhythm of music and laughter. Yet time continues moving forward. Gradually, some families begin gathering their children and preparing to leave. Merchants extinguish the lamps at their stalls. The musicians finish their final song and pack their instruments into cloth cases. The celebration slowly dissolves into the quiet of the evening. You step away from the square and follow a narrow street leading downhill toward the darker neighbourhoods closer to the water. The air grows cooler as the night deepens. Lantern light flickers along the walls while distant waves from the Bosphorus whisper beyond the hills. Soon the watchmen of the city will begin their patrols through these shadowed streets, and the nighttime life of Istanbul will reveal another side of the great imperial capital. You follow the quiet street as it slopes gently downward toward the darkening water. The festive noise from the square fades behind you, replaced by the softer sounds of evening in the city. Footsteps grow less frequent now. Most families have already returned indoors. The sky above Istanbul has deepened into a rich blue. Only a faint trace of the sunset remains along the western horizon. Lanterns flicker in the windows of houses lining the street. Their light spills onto the pavement in warm, golden shapes that tremble slightly with each movement of the wind. You continue walking until the street opens toward a wide terrace overlooking the Bosphorus. The view spreads out before you like a quiet painting. The dark water moves slowly under the moonlight. Ships anchored in the distance sway gently, their masts cutting thin lines against the sky. Small lanterns hang from the decks, glowing softly as sailors move about, finishing their evening tasks. A cool breeze drifts across the water and touches your face. The air smells faintly of salt and wet wood. Many observers who wrote about Istanbul during the 17th century remarked on the beauty of the Bosphorus at night. The narrow strait forms a natural gateway between continents, and the lights of the city reflect across its surface in long shimmering trails. Standing here, you understand why so many travellers pause to admire this view. A fisherman sits on the stone edge of the terrace nearby. His line stretches down into the dark water while he waits patiently for movement below. Beside him rests a small lantern and a wooden bucket. He nods politely when he notices you looking his way. Fishing along the Bosphorus has supported local residents for centuries. Records from the Ottoman administration mention organised fishing rights and regulations designed to protect important fish populations passing through the strait during seasonal migrations. Tonight, the fisherman seems content simply to enjoy the calm of the evening. Further along the terrace, two sailors sit sharing a loaf of bread and a bottle of wine. While speaking quietly about their upcoming journey, their ship waits in the harbour until morning tides allow them to depart. You lean against the stone wall and watch the slow movement of the water. Across the strait, faint lights mark villages and towers along the distant shoreline. One small curiosity mentioned in early travel writings describes how residents of Istanbul often recognise specific ships by their lantern patterns at night. Merchants who traded regularly with the city developed familiar signals that allowed harbour workers to identify them from a distance. The idea adds a subtle layer of communication to the quiet waters. Behind you, the city continues settling into its nighttime rhythm. A door closes somewhere along the street. A cat slips silently between two buildings before disappearing into the shadows. The fisherman suddenly lifts his line. A silver flash breaks the surface of the water before he pulls the fish carefully onto the stones beside him. He examines the catch with satisfaction before placing it gently into the bucket. Night fishing often provides fresh food for the morning markets. You continue along the terrace until you reach a small wooden dock where several boats are tied together. Their ropes creak softly as the water shifts beneath them. The lantern on the dock sways slightly. Several young men sit near the edge of the pier, singing quietly while strumming a lute. Their melody drifts out across the water, blending with the slow splash of waves against the wooden hulls. Music feels different at night. The notes travel farther in the cooler air, echoing across the quiet harbour. Studies of Ottoman urban life often highlight the importance of the waterfront as both an economic and social space. During the day, these shores overflow with trade and labour. At night, they become places of reflection where residents pause to breathe after long hours of work. The contrast between day and night reveals another side of the city. You sit on a wooden post near the dock and listen to the song for a while. The words are soft and melodic, telling a story of a sailor longing to return home after many months at sea. The melody rises and falls gently like the water beside the dock. A passing breeze carries the smell of roasted chestnuts from a vendor walking slowly along the street above the terrace. His small charcoal brazier glows red as he calls quietly to anyone who might still be awake. A few customers approach him exchanging coins for warm paper cones filled with chestnuts. You buy one and taste the sweet nutty flavour. The warmth feels comforting in the cool night air. Researchers examining daily routines in Ottoman cities sometimes discuss how evening life balanced relaxation with caution. Although many residents enjoyed nighttime walks or social gatherings, the darker streets also required vigilance. Soon the watchmen would begin their rounds. You finish the last chestnut and brush the crumbs from your hands. The fisherman has packed his gear and begun walking home, with his bucket swinging gently beside him. The singers finish their song and step into one of the small boats before pushing away from the dock. The quiet grows deeper. Above the rooftops, the moon climbs slowly between the minarets. The great capital of the Ottoman Empire rests for a few hours, yet even now unseen figures are preparing to guard the sleeping city. Watchmen will soon walk these streets with lanterns and staffs, listening for trouble in the dark, and you are about to follow them into the shadowed alleys where Istanbul protects itself through the night. You leave the quiet terrace and begin walking back into the darker streets of the city. The cool air of the Bosphorus fades behind you as the narrow lanes close once more between rows of wooden houses. Night has settled completely now. The sky above is deep and clear, and the moon hangs between the slender minarets like a pale lantern suspended over the rooftops. Only scattered lights remain in the windows of homes where families are finishing their evening conversations before sleep. Your footsteps echo gently against the stones. In the distance, a faint metallic sound reaches your ears. Clink, clink. It repeats slowly, accompanied by the steady tap of a wooden staff against the pavement. Soon the source of the sound appears at the end of the street. A watchman. He carries a lantern in one hand and a long staff in the other. At his belt hangs a ring of metal keys that jingle softly with each step. His lantern casts a circle of yellow light that moves across the ground as he walks. He pauses briefly when he sees you approaching. Then he nods in quiet acknowledgement before continuing on his patrol. Night watchmen played an important role in maintaining order within Ottoman cities. Municipal regulations from the period describe organised patrols that move through neighbourhoods after dark to discourage theft, respond to fires, and assist residents who might need help. The watchmen knew their districts well. They recognised familiar faces, noted unusual activity, and kept careful attention on streets where trouble might arise. You followed the same lane for a while, keeping the watchman's lantern in sight ahead of you. His staff strikes the ground at steady intervals. Tap, tap, tap. The sound carries through the quiet neighbourhood. Most houses now appear dark, though a few windows still glow faintly where someone reads or finishes late work. A cat slips across the street and disappears beneath a wooden staircase. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries briefly before a soothing voice quiets the sound again. The city sleeps lightly. An unusual detail, recorded in a few old accounts, describes how watchmen sometimes called out the hours during their patrols. Their voices echoed through the streets, reminding residents that the night was passing safely. The practice varied from district to district, but it helped reinforce the watchman's presence. Ahead, the watchman stops near a narrow alley and lifts his lantern to inspect the shadows between the buildings. Satisfied that nothing unusual hides there, he continues down the road. You pause near a small square where a fountain trickles quietly under the moonlight. The water catches the pale glow of the lantern and reflects it in small, shimmering ripples. A second watchman enters the square from another street. The two men exchange a few quiet words before continuing their patrols in opposite directions. The coordination suggests a carefully organised system of nighttime security. City records preserved from the Ottoman administration show that neighbourhoods often relied on both official guards and local residents working together to maintain safety after dark. In many areas, community members supported the watchmen by reporting suspicious activity or assisting during emergencies. Fire posed one of the greatest dangers in a city built largely from wood. A single spark could spread quickly from roof to roof. For this reason, watchmen remained alert for the smell of smoke or unusual flickering light during their rounds. You continue walking along a street that slopes gently downward between closely packed houses. A faint glow appears ahead, where a small bakery continues working through the night. Bakers often begin their preparations long before sunrise, so that fresh bread will be ready for the morning markets. Through the open doorway, you see a baker kneading dough on a wide wooden table, while another worker tends the oven. The warm smell of baking bread drifts into the cool night air. The baker looks up briefly and smiles before returning to his work. Night workers like these form a quiet layer of the city's life that many daytime visitors never notice. Fishermen preparing boats, bakers tending ovens, watchmen patrolling streets, all contribute to the steady functioning of the capital even while most residents sleep. You continue past the bakery and enter another narrow lane where the houses lean slightly toward each other above the street. The moonlight barely reaches the ground here. Your footsteps sound louder in the enclosed space. From somewhere ahead, you hear a faint scuffling sound. The watchman's lantern soon reappears around the corner, illuminating a pair of stray dogs arguing over a scrap of food. The dogs scatter when the light approaches, disappearing into the darkness with quiet growls. The watchman chuckles softly at the sight. Moments like this remind you that even in the grand capital of a powerful empire, ordinary little dramas unfold in every alley. Historical studies of urban policing in Ottoman cities often note that maintaining order relied heavily on personal familiarity within neighbourhoods. Watchmen recognised residents and learnt the normal patterns of each street, allowing them to notice when something unusual occurred. This familiarity created a sense of quiet guardianship. The watchman pauses again beneath a wooden balcony and lifts his lantern toward the rooftops, scanning for any sign of smoke. Satisfied that all is well, he continues down the road. You follow the lane until it opens toward a slightly broader avenue where the night air feels cooler again. Far away you hear the faint splash of water along the Bosphorus. The city sleeps, yet the watchful patrols continue moving through its shadows. And before morning arrives, one more challenge may appear that every resident of Istanbul quietly fears. Fire! You continue walking through the dim street after the watchman disappears around the corner. The quiet now feels deeper than before. Most houses have gone completely dark, and the moonlight alone guides your steps between the leaning wooden buildings. The air carries a faint scent of smoke from distant hearth fires that are slowly dying out for the night. Above the rooftops, you notice something larger rising against the sky. A long stone wall appears ahead, broken by tall towers and heavy gates. Lanterns burn at several points along the outer wall, and guards stand in silent watch near the entrances. You have reached the outer boundary of Topkapi Palace. Even at night, the complex carries an unmistakable presence. Its high walls stretch across the hilltop like a quiet fortress overlooking the Bosphorus. Beyond those walls lies the administrative heart of the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan himself lives within those grounds. Official records from the Ottoman court describe Topkapi Palace not as a single building, but as an enormous compound filled with courtyards, gardens, offices, kitchens and residences. Thousands of people worked inside its walls, serving the needs of the imperial household and the government. From where you stand, however, the palace remains mostly hidden. Only the outer gate stands visible. 2 guards in tall white hats stand beside the entrance. Their spears rest upright against the stone, while their lantern casts a steady glow across the archway. You approach slowly, not wanting to disturb their quiet watch. The gate itself is massive. Thick wooden doors reinforced with iron bands rise several meters high. Above the arch you can see carved calligraphy illuminated faintly by the lantern light. Inside those gates lies a world of ceremony and power that few ordinary residents ever witnessed directly. Travellers who described the palace during earlier centuries often wrote about the vast number of officials, servants, scribes, cooks and guards required to maintain the imperial household. Some accounts estimate that several thousand people lived or worked within the palace complex during busy periods. The scale of such an institution feels difficult to imagine while standing alone in the quiet street. You lean briefly against the cool stone wall and look up toward the towers. Somewhere beyond them, the gardens of the palace stretch toward the sea. Trees planted centuries earlier now grow tall within the courtyards, offering shade during the hot summer months. One small curiosity mentioned in several palace descriptions involves the enormous kitchens used to feed the imperial household. These kitchens reportedly contained rows of giant cauldrons where cooks prepared meals not only for the Sultan and his family, but also for hundreds of officials and attendants. The organisation required to operate such a kitchen must have been extraordinary. Even at this late hour, faint signs of life continue behind the walls. A distant light flickers through a high window. Somewhere inside the palace grounds a guard's voice calls softly to another patrol. The Empire never completely sleeps. A horse approaches slowly along the street behind you. You turn to see a mounted messenger riding toward the palace gate. His cloak moves gently in the night breeze as the horse's hooves strike the stones with steady rhythm. The guards step forward when he arrives. The messenger dismounts and presents a sealed document. One guard disappears briefly through a smaller door set within the larger gate, while the other remains beside the horse. Moments later, the door opens again and the messenger is allowed inside. The heavy wood closes behind him with a deep sound that echoes softly across the street. Watching the brief exchange reminds you that decisions made within those walls influence lands stretching thousands of miles beyond this city. From the mountains of Anatolia to the deserts of Arabia, imperial orders travel outward from this palace. Scholars studying the political structure of the Ottoman Empire often emphasize how carefully organized the administrative system became over time. Scribes recorded official decisions, couriers carried messages across long distances, and provincial governors reported back to the capital through complex communication networks. Standing here beneath the palace walls makes that system feel very real. The guards return to their silent watch. You nod politely as you pass and continue walking along the outer wall where the street curves gently downhill. Moonlight reflects faintly from the smooth stone surface. A breeze from the Bosphorus rustles the leaves of nearby trees. The quiet of the palace district feels different from the residential neighbourhoods you walked through earlier. Here the streets seem wider and more open, designed to accommodate official processions and visiting dignitaries. Yet even here, small signs of ordinary life appear. A stray dog sleeps beside a doorway. A lantern burns above a guardhouse where 2 soldiers sit sharing a quiet conversation. The great machinery of empire exists side by side with simple human routines. You follow the wall until it reaches a viewpoint overlooking the water. From this height, The Bosphorus glimmers in long silver ribbons beneath the moon. Ships drift slowly with the current, while their lanterns glow like distant stars. Somewhere across the water, another watchman calls out softly, his voice carried by the wind. Researchers examining palace life continue discussing how isolated the Sultan actually was from the everyday experiences of the city beyond these walls. Some historians suggest that the court functioned as a highly structured world of its own, separated from ordinary urban life by layers of ceremony and protocol. Others believe the Sultan and his advisors remained deeply informed about the city through officials, messengers, and reports arriving daily. Either way, the palace remains the centre from which the empire's authority radiates outward. You take one last look at the towering gate before turning away. The night grows colder now, and as you walk back into the darker neighbourhoods of the city, a faint smell of smoke drifts through the air once more. In a city built largely from wood, that smell always carries a quiet warning. Fire. You continue down the quiet street after leaving the towering walls of the palace behind. The night feels deeper now. Most lanterns in the surrounding houses have gone dark, leaving only a few dim lights glowing behind wooden shutters. Your footsteps echo softly along the stones. The smell of smoke drifts faintly through the air again. At first it seems ordinary. Many cooking fires are still cooling from the evening meal. Yet as you walk farther along the lane, the scent grows stronger, sharper. A flicker of orange light appears ahead. You quicken your pace. At the end of the street, several residents stand outside their homes, looking toward the same direction. Their voices carry a note of concern as they point toward a nearby block where a faint glow rises above the rooftops. Fire, in a city built largely from timber fire, is always feared. The houses of Istanbul stand close together along narrow streets. Wooden beams support upper floors that often lean outward above the road. When flames begin spreading through such structures, they can travel quickly from roof to roof. Municipal regulations from the Ottoman period describe numerous efforts by city authorities to manage this danger. Night watchmen were instructed to remain alert for smoke, and special firefighting teams were organised to respond when alarms were raised. You follow the gathering crowd toward the glow. Around the corner, a small house burns brightly near the edge of a courtyard. Flames climb along the wooden beams while smoke curls upward into the night sky. Residents hurry forward carrying buckets of water drawn from the nearest fountain. A chain of neighbours forms quickly. One person fills a bucket at the fountain. Another passes it along the line. Soon, water begins splashing against the burning wall. The effort feels urgent but organised. People shout instructions, while others move furniture and household goods away from the spreading flames. A man climbs onto the roof of the neighbouring house and begins throwing tiles down to create a break that might slow the fire. The crackle of burning wood fills the air. You step aside to give the workers space as the bucket line continues. One resident rushes forward carrying a large wool blanket soaked in water. He presses it against the lower beams of the burning structure in hopes of smothering the flames. The heat from the fire pushes against your face even from several steps away. Yet the response from the neighbourhood grows stronger with each passing moment. More residents arrive carrying buckets and tools. A pair of watchmen appear with lanterns and staffs, shouting directions to help coordinate the effort. Their presence brings a little more order to the chaotic scene. Historical descriptions of fires in Ottoman Istanbul often emphasise how communities work together to control them. Before the development of modern fire brigades, residents themselves formed the first line of defence against disaster. Everyone understood the danger. A single burning house could threaten an entire district. One account written by a European visitor in the 17th century describes watching a similar fire where dozens of neighbours rushed into the streets with ladders, buckets and tools while shouting warnings across the rooftops. Tonight, the same urgency fills the courtyard. Water splashes again and again against the flames. Gradually, the fire begins losing some of its strength. Smoke thickens in the air as the wet wood hisses beneath the cooling water. The crackling grows softer, replaced by the steady sound of pouring buckets. After several long minutes, the flames shrink to glowing embers along the damaged beams. A cautious cheer rises from the crowd. The worst seems to have passed. Several residents move closer to inspect the structure, while others continue pouring water over the remaining hotspots. The owner of the house stands nearby, wrapped in a blanket offered by a neighbour. His face looks tired, but grateful as friends and strangers alike pat his shoulder reassuringly. A small curiosity mentioned in several older reports describes how communities sometimes stored large wooden hooks and ladders specifically for fighting fires. These tools allowed residents to pull burning beams apart before the flames could spread. You notice one such hook leaning against the courtyard wall, now its iron tip still glowing faintly in the lantern light. The watchmen speak quietly with several neighbours while examining the damaged structure. They will likely report the incident to city officials in the morning. Fires remained a constant challenge for Istanbul throughout its long history. Urban records describe repeated efforts by authorities to introduce better firefighting equipment and stricter building practices to reduce the risk. Despite these efforts, the combination of wooden architecture and crowded streets meant that vigilance was always necessary. You watch as the crowd slowly begins to disperse. Some residents return home once the danger has passed. Others remain a while longer, helping the homeowner gather belongings and secure the damaged structure for the night. The courtyard gradually grows quieter again. Only the faint smell of wet smoke lingers in the cool air. The watchmen resume their patrols, their lanterns moving away into the dark streets. You step back onto the main road and continue walking. Above the rooftops, the moon still shines calmly over the sleeping city. The fire has been contained, and once again, Istanbul settles into its fragile nighttime peace. Soon, the first hints of morning will begin appearing over the eastern horizon. The great capital will wake again. You leave the quiet courtyard where the fire has finally faded into damp smoke and glowing embers. The night air feels cooler now, carrying the faint scent of wet wood and distant sea breeze. The watchmen have moved on with their lanterns, and the neighbours who rushed to help have slowly returned to their homes. The street grows still again. You continue walking through the sleeping city. Moonlight rests gently across the rooftops of Istanbul, turning the domes and minarets into soft silhouettes against the sky. The streets that bustled with merchants and sailors earlier now lie almost empty. Only the occasional cat slips quietly across the pavement. A baker passes you carrying a sack of flour over his shoulder. He nods politely before entering a small bakery where a warm glow already shines from the oven. Morning preparations have begun. Writers who visited Istanbul during earlier centuries often commented on how early the city stirred each day. Bakers, fishermen, and market workers began their tasks long before sunrise, so that fresh food would be ready when the streets filled again. Inside the bakery, you hear the steady rhythm of kneading dough. A wooden paddle scrapes gently across the table. The smell of fresh bread begins drifting into the cool air. You continue along the road until the houses thin and the skyline opens once more toward the Bosphorus. The water reflects the pale moonlight in long trembling lines. Far out in the harbour, a few ships shift slowly with the tide. Lanterns on their decks glow like small stars floating on the dark water. The quiet moment feels almost suspended between night and morning. You sit on a low stone wall overlooking the strait and allow the calm to settle around you. Behind you, the vast city rests. Hundreds of thousands of people sleep within its wooden houses, and stone courtyards, merchants, sailors, craftsmen, scholars, soldiers, children, each life woven into the fabric of the Ottoman capital. The city you walked through today revealed only small pieces of that fabric. Busy markets where spices and silk arrived from distant lands. Coffee houses filled with laughter and debate. Courtyards where families shared simple meals. Bathhouses glowing with steam and conversation. Mosques whose domes rose peacefully above the streets. Watchmen guarding silent alleys. Fishermen casting lines beneath the moon. Historical records preserved from the Ottoman period often describe Istanbul as one of the most vibrant cities of its age. Its population brought together languages, faiths, and traditions from across 3 continents. Yet beneath that enormous complexity, daily life followed familiar rhythms that any human heart can recognize. Work in the morning, trade in the afternoon, meals with family, stories shared with friends, quiet reflection beside the water. Even the dangers of fire and the watchful patrols of the night became part of the city's living pattern. As you sit there watching the water move slowly beneath the moon, the sky begins to change. A faint pale glow appears along the eastern horizon. Dawn approaches. A rooster calls somewhere in the distance. The baker behind you slides the first round of bread into the oven. Soon, the call to prayer will rise again from the minarets, and the city will awaken once more. Porters will return to the harbour. Merchants will open their shops inside the Grand Bazaar. Coffee houses will fill with conversation. Children will chase hoops through narrow streets. And the great capital of the Ottoman Empire will begin another day much like the last. You breathe in the cool morning air and allow your shoulders to relax. The water continues its slow, endless movement between continents. The lanterns on the ships fade as the sky brightens. The city feels peaceful now, safe, alive. For a moment longer, you remain seated on the stone wall, listening to the gentle sounds of early morning beginning to stir across the rooftops. Then the first call to prayer rises softly into the growing light. The voice floats over domes, gardens, and wooden houses, welcoming the new day. And as it spreads across the city, Istanbul awakens once again. You take one final look across the Bosphorus. The sun begins touching the water with pale gold. The long night has passed. The great city lives on, just as it has for centuries, filled with ordinary lives and quiet stories that unfold one day at a time. Now the morning has arrived, and your long walk through Ottoman Istanbul slowly fades into the calm light of dawn. Take a slow breath. Let the sounds of the waking city soften. Allow your thoughts to drift gently like the water beneath the bridge. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. The story has carried you through the streets, the markets, the courtyards, and the quiet waters of the Bosphorus. And now it is time to rest. Sleep well. The morning light spreads slowly across the rooftops of Istanbul. Soft gold touches the domes first, then slides gently down the minarets and into the quiet streets below. The city wakes gradually like someone stretching after a long, restful sleep. You sit quietly for a moment longer, listening to the calm rhythm of water along the Bosphorus. A few early boats move through the strait. Their oars dip softly into the surface, sending small ripples across the reflection of the rising sun. The air feels cool and peaceful. Behind you, the baker's oven crackles as the first loaves begin to brown. Soon, the warm scent of fresh bread will drift through the streets and greet the early workers beginning their day. But for now, the city remains gentle and unhurried. The call to prayer fades slowly into the morning sky. Pigeons lift from the rooftops and circle once before settling again near the domes. The enormous capital of the Ottoman Empire continues its long story day after day, century after century. You have wandered its markets and quiet courtyards. You have listened to its music and watched its lanterns glow beside the water. Now the streets fade softly into memory. The sounds of the harbour grow distant. The warmth of the sun spreads slowly across the calm water. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts drift like the ships moving quietly along the horizon. The city will continue its life without hurry, and you can rest knowing that its stories will always be waiting whenever you return. Sweet dreams.